We continue now at the top of Daf Tesvav Amar Aleph and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 15a. On the previous summit, there was a machlokas Rav and Shmuel. Let's say a person sells a field, a mocher sells a field to a lokeach, to a buyer. It turns out that the mocher had stolen the field. It wasn't his field. There was no sale to begin with. And so that field is taken away from the buyer by the nigzel, by the person who was the real owner of the field, the person who was stolen from. And so now the person who bought the field, he wants to get back the money that he paid for the field, but he also wants to get back the shevach, the improvements that he made on the field, and he's getting that back from the person who sold it to him. So there's a machlokas Rav and Shmuel whether he's allowed to get back the shevach from the seller. The issue is, according to Rav, he can get back the shevach. There's no problem. According to Shmuel, the issue is he can't get back the shevach. The way the Gemara explained Shmuel on the previous summit was it's a problem of ribis. It's a problem of looking like interest. The reason why it looks like interest is because there was no sale over here. There was no field. The field really belonged to somebody else. And so what essentially happened is the buyer lent money to the seller, and then the buyer is getting back his money. Now he's also getting back the improvements. Essentially, he's getting back more money than he lent. That's a problem of ribis. That's how the Gemara explained Shmuel on the previous summit. So the Gemara now is in the middle of asking a question on Shmuel from a brisa, and the brisa seemed to be saying a situation of a gazlan, that the gazlan is that you're trying to get reimbursed from the gazlan, and it said in this brisa that you take the principal from the chasim mishubadim, and you take the achilas peiros from the chasim b'nei chorin. And the problem was, what are you being reimbursed from the gazlan? You're taking the principal from the chasim mishubadim. What principal? We're talking about land over here. Just take back the original land that was stolen by the gazlan from the gazlan. So the Gemara had originally interpreted the brisa that it's talking about exactly the machlokas Rav and Shmuel. There's not really a gazlan. It's really a gazlan that sold the land to somebody else. But then the Gemara said no. Rava said no. It's actually talking about a gazlan. And the reason why you're collecting from the chasim mishubadim, from the gazlan, why not just take back the land that was stolen from you from the gazlan? It's because the gazlan actually ruined the land. He dug holes in the land, and so therefore there was a situation where he's collecting the peiros that were on the land, and then he's collecting back for the land itself, because the land itself was ruined. He has to be paid back the principal. That's how Rava explained the brisa. And now we're in the second interpretation, a similar interpretation of the brisa, alternate interpretation, that we are again talking about collecting from the gazlan. This is Rabba bar Rav Huna's answer, but he says the brisa is talking shenatlu masikin. You can't actually take the land back from the gazlan because there were people, non-Jews, who took it away from the gazlan. They now have control of the land, so you need to get paid back from the gazlan. So again, some parts are going to be collected from the chasim mishubadim, and some parts are going to be from the chasim b'nei chorin. Rashi explains, "Shenatalua masikim anosim akum." You have coercive non-Jews, natalua min hagazlan. They took it away from the gazlan. Umachmaso tanan Bava Kama hagozal sad mechaveru natalua masikin. So it says in Bava Kama, you have a situation like that where somebody steals a field from his friend, and then masikin take away the field. In machmas hagazlan, so if it's because of the gazlan that it was taken by the masikin, chayiv lahamid lo sad acher, he needs to give another field. Varei yotze mitachas yado, now he doesn't have that. It's a katani benetilas masikinu. Again, that's what we're talking about over here. And so that's what the brisa is saying. It's saying, "Ba nigzal ligvos karen." If the nigzal now wants to go to the gazlan and get back for his principal, govim min chasim mishubadim, that he collects from the chasim mishubadim, even from property with a lien on it. But nigzal ligvos peiros, if he wants to collect for the fruits that were taken, there were fruits on that property, govim min chasim b'nei chorin, that he collects from free property. Again, the point over here is the brisa has nothing to do with the machlokas Rav and Shmuel. It's really this situation of collecting from the gazlan. That's Rabba bar Rav Huna's interpretation, very similar to Rava's, but instead of having Rava's explanation where you dig holes, the gazlan ruined the property by digging it up. Here it's a situation of natalua masikin. And the Gemara continues, Rava lo amar karava bar Rav Huna. Rava did not give Rabba bar Rav Huna's explanation, meaning he did not explain the brisa that there were thugs that took away the field from the gazlan, because harehi yotza mitachas yado, because the phrase in the brisa was harehi yotza mitachas yado. Again, he stole a field, and harehi yotza mitachas yado, it is taken from him bedina mashma. That sounds like it's being taken in the courts by the nigzal. The nigzal is taking it away from the gazlan in the courts, as Rashi says, bedina mashma hilkach behotzas nigzal kamer. We're talking about the nigzal trying to get his money or his property back from the gazlan, the goves hakaren to kamer keshachafar boros, and therefore he explains, what are you talking about collecting the karen? Why not just take the land itself? Well, that's because there were pits that were dug in the field. That's how he interprets the harehi yotza mitachas yado. That's bedina mashma. Rabba bar Rav Huna lo amar karav, and Rabba bar Rav Huna, he doesn't want to say like Rava, because harehi yotza mitachas yado be'ena mashma. Harehi yotza mitachas yado sounds like it is the same way that it was when it was stolen. It wasn't all dug up physically. The property is the same. It was just taken away by thugs. thugs. As Rashi says, Be'ina mashma kemosha haisa, the field is as it always was. Velo shechafar baboros, we're not talking about a situation where it's dug up by pits. That's why he instead says it was taken away by thugs, and that's why he needs to get paid back. And again, he takes from the chasim mishubadim when it comes to the karen, he takes from the chasim b'nei chorin when it comes to the peiros. And the Gemara continues, Ravashi says, the way to understand the Brisa is litzdadin katani, you have to understand it as talking about to its sides, to two different cases, meaning as follows. The case is as follows. A person stole a field from his friend and it was full of fruits. And then he consumed the fruits. And then he sold the field. So now if the lokeach, this means to say that the person who bought the field, he essentially bought the field from someone who was a gazlan. If he wants to get back his principal, govim in a chasim mishubadim, then he collects from the chasim mishubadim. Now that's talking about the lokeach. That's what we mean. Katani, we're not always talking about the same person. We're learning first something about the lokeach, and then we're going to talk about the nigzal. So if the lokeach wants to get back the karen, the principal that he bought, so govim in the chasim mishubadim, that he collects from the chasim mishubadim. But nigzal ligvos peiros. Now if the nigzal, because again what was stolen was a field that was full of fruits, if the nigzal wants to get back the peiros, govim in the chasim b'nei chorin, he collects from the chasim b'nei chorin from free property. Now within Ravashi's answer, he essentially is splitting up the brisa that when we're talking about the nechasim b'nei chorin and the peiros, we're talking about the nigzal that's collecting, not the lokeach, and therefore that has nothing to do with Shmuel's case. It's nothing to do with interest. It's not an issue over here. We're not talking about the lokeach collecting for the peiros. We're talking about the nigzal. And Rashi explains, U'machres asad, again within Ravashi's answer, there's not only a gazlan over here, the gazlan went ahead and sold the field to a lokech, to a buyer, v'harehi yotze mitachas yado. So then according to that explanation, when it says v'harehi yotze mitachas yado, it means to say it's yotze mitachas yado shel lokeach, it's taken from the lokeach, bedino uve'ein, it's taken away by law from the lokeach, because he essentially bought a field that was stolen, and it's still be'ein, nothing actually happened to the field, it wasn't dug up. That's how he understands the brisa. And the Gemara continues, Bein l'Rava, Bein l'Rava bar Rav Huna, whether we're following Rava or Rava bar Rav Huna. And Rashi explains, Bein l'Rava, meaning the mukmi gevias karen min hagazlan benigzal. Both of them are saying that the case of the brisa is the nigzal is collecting the principal from the gazlan. Again, the question was, why didn't he just take back the land itself that was stolen from him? So either you have the interpretation that there were holes, the gazlan dug holes into the land and ruined the land, or the case is Masechet and took away the land. But either way, he's getting back the principal now, even from the chasim mishubadim. And so the Gemara is about to ask, hamilval pehu, this would be no better than a milval pet, like an oral loan. There's no documentation over here in this case. The nigzal, instead of getting back his original land, he's now going to collect from the gazlan, from liened property. But why is he allowed to collect from liened property? The people who bought from the gazlan, they would have had no idea that the property they're buying has a lien on it. V'lo tarfim mishabdi, he shouldn't be able to collect from property with a lien on it. That's the question of the Gemara. Bein l'Rava bar Rav Huna milval pehu. Whether you're following Rava or Rava bar Rav Huna, it has the status of a milval peh. Umilval peh, ino govim in a chasim mishubadim. When it comes to a milval peh, you're not able to collect a milval peh from the chasim mishubadim. So what's going on over here that you're able to collect from the chasim mishubadim? And the Gemara answers to that, hacha b'mayaskin, and here what is the case? Kisha'amad bedin v'hadar zavin. What happened over here is that the gazlan actually went to court. It was well known what happened. After he went to court, then he goes ahead and sells some of his property. That property is considered to have a lien on it. As Rashi explains, Kisha'amad bedin kodem shemachar nechasa. Before he sold his property, there was a court case. V'kevan dechayvu bezin, and once bezin said this guy is chayiv, that he essentially stole this property, so islay kol, it's like the word goes out, everybody knows. V'havalei kamilva b'shtar, that's the equivalent of a milva b'shtar. There is a lien now, so to speak, that goes onto this property, and anyone who buys from this gazlan has to be aware that this property might be taken away because of this principle, this field that was stolen by this person. So that's what the Gemara means when it says Kisha'amad bedin v'hadar zavin. Again, there already was a court case, and then he went ahead and sold his property. But the Gemara says, one second, if so, peiros nami. So when it comes to the fruits as well, because it said again in the brisa there was a distinction. When it comes to the principle, you can collect from the chasim mishubadim. When it comes to the fruits, you can only collect from the chasim b'nei chorin. But if there was a court case, so then there's a court case over here already, and the word goes out. Everybody should be aware. You should be able to collect for the fruits as well from the chasim mishubadim. And so the Gemara says to that, kishamad bedin ala karen v'lo amr bedin ala peiros. The case is There was a court case regarding the principle, but there was no court case regarding the peiros, regarding the fruits. The Gemara says, "My piska." Rashi says over here, "My piska bitmi a piska tana lemilse de omid bedin ein omid al peiros," meaning to say, why is the Tana deciding that there was a court case for the actual land, but there was no court case for the fruits? Why would you make that separation? Why would you make that distinction automatically? In other words, the Tana is just not going to arbitrarily come up with a case where there's a court case on one part and not on the other part. The Gemara says, well, it's not arbitrary. Stama de milsa, that's the normal situation. Ki tava inish karna tava beresha. When a person makes a claim, first he's going to claim the principle, and so therefore that court case happened, and they didn't have the court case yet on the peiros. That would be an additional case. And the Gemara continues, V'savar Shmuel lokach migazlan lesle shivcha. Going back to Shmuel's opinion, does Shmuel really hold that if a person buys from a gazlan and he improves the field, so he's allowed to collect back the principal, that which he purchased, which again, really, he purchased this field that the seller had stolen. It wasn't really his field, but he doesn't get the shevach. If he improved the field, he's not allowed to get the shevach again, as we explained on the previous summon, because now already it looks like a situation of ribis, because if there was really no field, because the person had stolen the field. So what really happened here again is the lokach just lent money to the seller. He lent money to the gazlan. Now he's getting back more because he's getting back the shevach. But does Shmuel really say that he's not allowed to collect the shevach? We have a contradiction to that. But Shmuel said to Rav Chinina bar Shilas, Imlich v'chosov shufra shivcha upiri. You have to consult when you're writing these kinds of documents. We quoted this idea earlier, and then you write the shufra, the shivcha, and the piri into the shtar. And Rashi here says, Rav Chinina bar Shilas sofer hayer. Rav Chinina bar Shilas was a scribe. He would write up shtaros, and so Shmuel gave him this advice. He said, Imlich, you have to consult, meaning, Kishata kosev shtar, when you're writing a document, he molech b'mocher, you have to consult the seller to see what kind of responsibility he's taking on the sale. In Mikabel Olav, lahagvos l'lokech, mishvar nechosav, karna v'shivchu pri, mitrafu mimenu, is he accepting that from the best of his property, is he taking responsibility that, let's say, the field gets taken away from the buyer, is he accepting that he's going to pay back the buyer from the best of his property? Is he accepting that he's going to pay back the principal and the shevach and the peiros? That all of that you have to consult with the seller to see what kind of responsibility he's taking upon himself. And so what exactly was Shmuel talking about over here when he said consult the seller to see the level of responsibility that he is taking? But what exactly is the situation? Meaning, what is he taking responsibility for? Is this property being taken away because it turns out the seller was a thief, or is something else happening? So Iba Balchov. Now, if you're going to say it's possible, we're not talking over here about a situation where the seller is taking responsibility that he might be a gazlan, he stole the field. Maybe it's a creditor that's taking away the property. But if we're talking about a situation of a creditor taking away the property, and again, we mentioned earlier, if a creditor takes away the property, already in that situation, it's obvious that the buyer can be paid back and also be paid back for the improvement, because there it doesn't look like ribis. There it actually was a real sale, and all that's happening is a creditor is coming along, a creditor of the seller, and taking away the property. Now the seller, it's essentially like the seller is trying to get back his property to pay off his debt. So in that situation, if he's getting his property back, so to speak, he certainly would pay the shevach to the buyer. That's what the Gemara means to say. But Iba Balchov, however, if we're talking about a Balchov, Mislei Peri, it can't be that we're talking about a Balchov, because a Balchov does not collect the peiros. And over here, it mentions peiros, it mentions the fruits of the field, but a Balchov doesn't collect the peiros of the field. V'amar Shmuel, but Shmuel said, Balchov goves hashevach. It is true that a Balchov, a creditor, can collect the improvements in the property, but shevach in aval peiros lo, he can collect the improvements, but he's not allowed to collect the fruits. And so therefore, we can't be talking about a situation where it's a creditor that's taking away the property from the buyer. Rather, is it not that we're talking about a situation where you're purchasing from a gazlan, meaning we're talking about exactly the situation where he's taking this level of responsibility, and Shmuel is telling the sofer, is telling the scribe, this seller, you have to consult him, how much responsibility is he taking, should it turn out that he stole the field, etc., and now it gets taken away from the buyer, and what's being written in over here? What's Shmuel talking about? Shmuel's talking about the shevach as well. You have to consult the seller in terms of the shevach, so apparently there is a level of responsibility that the seller is taking in terms of the shevach. He does have to pay back the shevach to the buyer, and it's not a problem of ribis. And so the Gemara answers to that. Amar Rav Yosef says, the case over here is where he has land, he has property. And Rashi explains, the case over here is that the seller who was a gazlan, who was a thief, what's happening is, he's not giving the buyer, when he's paying back the buyer, he's not giving him money, he's giving him land. Velomos, he's not giving him money. Then it doesn't look like ribbis. Already in a situation where he has land, so that's not a problem to give back for the shevach as well. That would be such a situation. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya. Abaya said back to him, back to Rav Yosef, this answer that suddenly when there's land, there's no problem. So Abaya said to Rav Yosef, are you allowed to do a loan where you do one sa'ah of chitin, one sa'ah of wheat for another sa'ah of wheat in a situation where there's land? Does that suddenly allow it? And Rashi explains, in general, you're not allowed to have a loan where you lend a person a certain amount of wheat and then he's supposed to pay you back the same amount of wheat, because Shema Yukru Chitin, because then you have a problem. Maybe the value of wheat will go up. And so now suddenly you're saying, now normally you're not allowed to do that because it's a problem of ribbis, but when you're talking about land, suddenly it's not a problem. And the Gemara answers to that, Amar Lei said back to him, you can't compare the two cases. Hasam halva hachazvine. Over there we're talking about a case of a loan, over here we're talking about a case of a purchase. And Rashi says, when you're talking about a loan, it is more relevant to say there's issues of ribbis over there than by a sale. So in this situation where you're talking about a sale, so if there's land involved, it no longer looks like ribbis, it's not a problem. But just because there would be land involved by a case of sabisa, which is a case of a loan, that already still could be more problematic. And the Gemara continues, Ika Diamri, there are those that say a slightly different version of the back and forth between Rav Yosef and Abaya. Amar Rav Yosef says, Hachab Mayaskin, and here what are we talking about? Meaning here, where Shmuel gave advice to the scribe, where it sounded like the person who purchased the field from the thief is entitled to get back the shevach, that's Kagon Shekanu Miyadu, it's where they made a kinyan related to that fact. If they made a kinyan specifically for this, then it's not a problem of ribbis. Rashi here explains, Shekanu Miyadu ala shevach, they essentially made a kinyan on any improvements that would happen to the field. That's already a situation where he obligates himself for the shevach from the moment he sells it, before you ever have any wages, so to speak, for the fact that he delayed, for the fact that he essentially lent the seller money. So therefore, if from the outset, from the beginning of the sale, you make this kinyan with that understanding that the shevach, he's responsible for the shevach as well, that would be an exception. Amar le Abaya, so in this version, again, Abaya responds to Rav Yosef. He says to Rav Yosef, if you make a special kinyan, are you suddenly allowed to borrow a saw in order to pay back a saw? That wouldn't allow it in that situation. Amarle said back to him, again, the same answer, Hasam halva v'hachazvini. Over there, you're talking about a loan. We're more strict with regards to ribbis. When it comes to a loan, here you're talking about a purchase. You can rely on this leniency. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Kufa, returning to what we said above, Amar Shmuel says, Balchov govas hashevach, that a creditor, when he's collecting from the chasim mishubadim, when he's collecting from lekuchos, he collects not only the property, but he collects from the improvements as well. And the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Taylor, you should know, Shekach kosiv lo mocher lokeach, that's exactly what a mocher writes to a lokeach. When a seller sells property to a lokeach and he takes responsibility, should it later be taken away from a creditor, he writes into the shtar, Anoikom v'eshri v'edki v'amrik zvina ilain, he says, essentially, I'm going to cleanse this purchase, I take responsibility. Inun v'amleon v'shivcheon, he talks about the improvements as well. You see the shevach as well. V'ekom kadama chutz v'zvina danan v'kaval aloi, and again, you have the witness's sign, and this is what is accepted, what he accepts upon himself. And so therefore you see that it's written into the shtar, essentially. He's taking responsibility on the shevach, and that shows that the Baal Chov is able to collect the shevach. And the Gemara says, Amar le Rav Chia bar Avin l'Rava, so Rav Chia bar Avin said to Rava, Elameata, but according to that, if the reason why the Baal Chov is able to get the shevach is because the seller took responsibility for that, so matana, so what about when somebody gives a gift, he gives property to somebody else, the loksiv lehachi, he doesn't write that in that case, because obviously someone who gives a gift is not taking responsibility if it's later taken away by a creditor. This is a situation of a gift. So hachanami delotar of shivcha, in that case, are you going to say that you don't collect the shevach in that case? Amarle said to him, yes, indeed, that is the case. You're not going to collect, the creditor doesn't get the shevach in that case. And the Gemara says, but is the strength of a matana greater than a sale? Amarle said to him, yes, indeed it is. Yafa, it is greater in this respect. And Rashi explains, Teda, you should know, the gova, that he does collect, the creditor does collect the shevach from the lokeach as well. The lokeach can't say, well, I'm the one that improved it, why should you collect that from me? And the reason is, shekach kosiv lo mocher lokeach, because that's exactly what the seller writes to the buyer when he sells the property and takes responsibility. When he writes into the document of sale that he's taking responsibility, should it be taken away by a creditor, the ashpi means ashket, I'm silencing any complaints, meaning the mocher tells the lokeach, I'm I'm taking responsibility if it's taken away from you. V'adki means atahar mikol ira, I'm going to purify from any complaints. Again, the same idea. The mocher is taking responsibility. Inun v'amalein v'shivcheon, and he mentions that he's taking responsibility for the shevach as well. V'kevan dal mocher hadar, and so therefore, since the buyer is going to go back to the seller in terms of the shevach as well, so gavi shivcha balchov milokeach v'chozer lokeach ala mocher. So that's exactly what happens. The creditor takes the shevach from the lokeach, and the lokeach will get compensated by the mocher, by the seller. And so then the Gemara asks, Matana de loksib behachi, but by a gift, so that's not written into any document. Sheina de mekavel olav achrayas mashu nosein. If a person gives property as a gift, he doesn't take achrayas on the gift. So therefore, hachinami dim nosein nechasav matana. Are you going to say that if a person gives his property as a gift, lo gavi balchov shivcha, so then the creditor is not able to take the improvement, hol velo hadr ala nosein, since the person who received the gift is not going to get paid back from the nosein. V'chiyafekoch matana bitmiya, is the strength of a gift greater? And the Gemara says, yes, yafa v'yaf, it actually is greater in this respect. B'davar zeh, in this respect, the strength is greater, and he's not going to collect the shevach in that case. The kaven de lo hadar gavi le lo ma'afsid le b'midi de lo afsid le balchov. The bishlama gufa shel karka, Rashi explains, I understand the actual land itself. So the person who receives the land from the giver, so he could say, Amar le, so then the person who is the creditor, who's taking the land away from the recipient, he could say, Amai kibalte, why did you accept that land? You essentially accepted a piece of land, but that land, there was a lien on that property. I'm going to collect that property. From where should I collect my debt? Avol shivcha, but when it comes to the improvements of the land, Samarlei says, my afsiditach, what did I make you lose out? Meaning to say, again, this person who received the land, so there's a taina against him. Why are you accepting property when there's a lien on that property? So the property itself can be taken away by the creditor. But that argument doesn't apply when it comes to the improvement on that property. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman says, Hamas Nisa Messiah Leila Mar Shmuel. The following brisa supports Shmuel. V'huna Chavrin, but our colleague Rav Huna Mukim La B'mili Achrini. He says that the brisa is actually talking about something else. Rashi explains, Messiah Leila Mar Shmuel, the Baal Chov Goves HaShvach. The brisa we're about to quote, it indicates like Shmuel that a creditor is able to collect from the improvements as well. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Hamocher Sada Lechaveru, if somebody sells a field to his friend, V'harehi Yotz Mitachas Yado, and then it's taken away from him, meaning to say, again, you have a situation where it's taken from the buyer, Kishu Gove Goves Akar Minachas Mishubadim, so when he collects, meaning to say, when the buyer goes to the seller and tries to get reimbursed, the principal he collects from the chasim mishubadim, v'shevach gova min chasim b'nei chorim. But when it comes to the shevach, that he collects just from the free property. And the assumption over here is we're talking about a creditor. Who's the one that took it away from the buyer? It was a creditor. This would indicate that the creditor takes away the shevach. However, v'huna chavrin, but Rav Huna, our colleague, mukim la b'milei achrini. He says this brisa is talking about something else, meaning bilokech migazlan. It's not talking about a situation where the person who bought it, a creditor, takes away the property. It's talking about when he bought it from a gazlan, and it's the nigzal that's taking away the property. Of course, when the nigzal is taking away the property, certainly takes away the shevach as well. And Rashi explains, Kishu gova, kishalokech chozer v'gova min hamocher. Again, when the lokech is collecting from the mocher, but b'mili achrini, Rav Huna says it's talking about something else. But davar achar, meaning b'lokech migazlan, it's talking about buying from a gazlan. The nigzal vaday taraf shevcha. The nigzal certainly collects the shevach. Diamar le'aroy ashbach. He says you basically improved my own land. Aval balcho, but when it comes to a creditor, kol kamed lo tarfo lo lav dideyu of reshusa delokech ashbach. If he hasn't collected it yet, it's not his property. It's still in the reshusa delokech. That's why there's a question when it comes to the Baal Chov, and again, that's why Rav Huna says it's irrelevant. Rav Huna says we're not talking here about a creditor. That's why the brisa is not a support for Shmuel, because we're talking here about the Nigzal. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Idach, we learned in another brisa, Hamocher Sadal Chaver, if somebody sells a field to his friend, Vishbicha, and the buyer improves the field, Uba Balcho Vitarfa, and then the creditor of the seller comes along and he collects the field from the buyer, Kishu Gova, so when the buyer is collecting, when he's getting compensated for both the field that he bought and the improvements that he made to the field, so in terms of the Shevach, in terms of the improvement, Im HaShevach Yosar Liyitzia, let's say the improvement is more than the amount that he spent, so Notelas HaShevach Mi Bala Karka, so he's allowed to collect the improvement that he can collect from the owner of the field, the person who sold him the field, V'hayitzia, and that which he spent, Mi Bal Chov, that he can collect from the creditor. V'hayitzia Yiseir Al HaShevach, now if the amount he spent is actually more than the improvement, Ein Lo Ela Hotzah Shir Shevach, he only can be compensated for what he spent up to the value of the shevach, up to the value of what it improved, mibal chov, and that he'll collect from the creditor. And so the Gemara now asks, so how is Shmuel going to understand this brisa? If we're talking about a situation of somebody who purchased from a gazlan, so in other words, we have a case over here where the seller was a thief, so then kasha reisha, then we have a difficulty with the beginning of the brisa. Diyamar Shmuel, because Shmuel says lokech migazlan lesle shivcha. Shmuel says that if a person buys from a gazlan, so in such a situation, that lokech is not going to be compensated for the shevach, for the improvement. Again, that's what we said before, that it looks like interest. And over here we're talking about where he is getting compensated for the shevach. And ibe bal chov, and if we're talking about a situation of a bal chov, meaning to say again, the person bought the field, and it's not that he bought it from a gazlan, but rather, as the brisa seems to say, a bal chov, a creditor came along and took it away from the buyer. So then kasha reisha v'seifa, so then the beginning and the end of the brisa are actually going to be difficult. Diyamar Shmuel bal chov goves hashevach, because Shmuel says that a bal chov, a creditor, actually does collect the shevach, he does collect the improvements of the field, and if Shmuel says that a bal chov is goves hashevach, why over here is it talking about the fact that the bal chov has to pay for it? And the Gemara says, if you want, I could say belokech migazlan. The case over here is that he purchased it, he bought it from a gazlan. Kagon sheyesh lo karka, and the case could be where he has karka. Again, we said that Shmuel would make an exception in a situation where, let's say the gazlan, let's say the seller who's the gazlan, is not paying back the shevach in money, but he's paying back the shevach with karka, then already doesn't look like ribbis. So in such a situation, the buyer actually would be compensated for the shevach if the seller has karka, if the gazlan has karka. Inami v'shekanu miyadu, or you could say again, from the outset they made a kinyan on the shevach as well. That was another solution we gave earlier, where it doesn't look like ribbis, so then we could again be talking about a situation where the buyer is going to be compensated for the shevach in those cases. And Ibai is saying, if you want, I could say bebalchov, we are talking about a creditor over here in this brisa. Velokashan, it's not difficult. Kan b'shevach, here we're talking about the kinds of improvement. And Rashi explains, if the Bryce is talking about buying from a gazlan, and hai bal chov hainu nigzal, and the word bal chov in the Bryce isn't a regular creditor, but it's referring to the nigzal, the one who the property was stolen from, so then kasha reisha, then the beginning of the Bryce is difficult. To katani notel as hashevach mi balakarka, it says that he takes the shevach from the balakarka, but again Shmuel said you don't take the shevach in a situation of a gazlan. And if you're talking about a situation of a regular creditor, kasha reisha v'sefer, the beginning and the end of the Bryce are difficult. To katani bal chov nosin, so see, the problem is, it says in this brisa that the creditor has to pay the expenses of the buyer to improve the land. According to Shmuel, the creditor collects the shevach, he doesn't have to pay anything, and so that would be difficult, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tesvav Amud Beis.